Hi there, it's your girl, Z, from transvoicelessons.com, and in this video I want to talk all about vocal fold mass and how we can manipulate it to get a thinner, lighter, and more feminine voice. This video is for anyone who thinks they sound too buzzy, heavy, dense, screechy, or clumsy with their voice. We're going to break this down into 5 parts. 1, the basics. 2, ear training. 3, how to use these exercises. 4, the exercises. 5, theory and some extra information. First, there are 2 primary differences between masculine and feminine vocal physiology. 1, the vocal tract length, and 2, the vocal fold mass. So the larynx, the pharynx, and the oral cavity, what we call the vocal tract, they expand and grow under the exposure of testosterone. When we're doing resonance, and we're controlling our resonance, we're trying to shrink that container so that we can undo the effect of testosterone. Alteration of the vocal fold mass seeks to reverse the sonic effects that testosterone has on the vocal folds. So by reducing the mass, it makes your sound thinner and smaller, which is more in line with feminine vocal physiology. The active, vibrating mass of the vocal folds can be controlled by the interaction between a few basic variables. 1, airflow force. 2, vocal fold closure. And 3, configuration. Configuration refers to a spectrum of thick to thin sound quality, which is controlled by engaging or disengaging more or less of the vocal fold tissue. Closure refers to the clenching or opening of the vocal folds, what we call adduction, adding force, or abduction, aborting force. Force of air refers to how much strength is applied with the lungs to actually displace the air. All of these elements are deeply connected, but these elements can be controlled pseudo-independent of one another. Control over all 3 gives the greatest freedom, but control over thickness and thinness yields the greatest feminization effect out of these vocal fold mass ingredients. While thinness and thickness is a continuum, there is a discrete flipping point between the 2 physical states. Learning how to alter the vocal fold mass and ultimately reduce it for your speech is a fundamental part of voice feminization. So let's go ahead and listen to the difference between thick and thin. So first I'm going to go ahead and do a thick sound, and I'll do it with darker resonance and a slightly lower pitch. Ah, ah, ah. Now a thin one at the exact same pitch and everything else. Ah, 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 ah. So I'll go ahead and use feminine resonance first. Here's what feminine resonance with a thick quality sounds like. Ha, heat from fire, fire from heat. Now with a thin quality. Ha, 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 heat from fire, fire from heat. Now let's go ahead and just listen to some different ones. Ah, ah, very thick and kind of noisy, false fold engagement. Ah, ah. Now I'll go ahead and do thin at a low pitch.
Oh, oh. So this is what a thin voice, really thin, sounds like at a lower pitch with dark resonance. You can hear how it sounds very empty, right?
And now I'm just gonna go ahead and do thicker vocal folds. You can hear that sound.
Ha, part. Okay, so here I am thin, right? This is a thin sound. And now I'm a lot thicker, and I'm adding a lot more weight to the sound, increasing my vocal fold mass. Let's go ahead and listen to some audio examples. So I want you to close your eyes and just focus very carefully on the sounds that you hear. Alright, in this ear training file, I will demonstrate the difference between thick and thin. I won't try to keep it at any particular pitch. I will just freely play around with thick and thin. So first, I'll go ahead and use thin sounds. Ha, part. Okay, so all of this is thin.
All of this is thin. You can hear how it's really light, right? And the volume doesn't really matter.
I'm ha, part. I'm still thin all this time.
Okay, and now I'm thick, and
now I'm thick all the way up here. I'm still very thick with my vocal folds, right? Hot part, and now I'm back here in a thinner configuration. You can hear the thinness, right? And now I'm here back to a thicker configuration. Ha, and now I'm here back to a thinner configuration. So thickness has this very cumbersome, clunky feeling when you try and take it higher. It sounds like this. Ah, it kind of sounds like I'm just shouting or yelling at the top, right? Whereas thinness, when it goes up in pitch, it feels much lighter and much easier. Ah, ah, ah. Let's listen to me start thick, go thin, and then bring it down to the original starting pitch while staying thin. Ah, ah. So as you can hear, the thick sound is very dense and heavy and buzzy. This is what people are always talking about when they say get the sound out of your chest. What they're really referring to are thick vocal folds, high density, high mass vocal folds that are vibrating with a lot of engagement. And as a result, it creates more movement so you can feel more of it. So thin often makes you sound much sweeter and lighter and softer and more feminine, and it's much easier. It can go in and out of the airflow so that you can have greater dynamic control. Plus, it also allows you to access higher pitches, which is pretty advantageous for what we're doing here. Now, let's go ahead and look at some exercises to help you learn how to control your vocal fold mass. Okay, so first let's talk about how to use these exercises. To make the most of these exercises, listen first to the ear training section to gain an idea of what you're seeking, then explore and experiment with all the different approaches. These exercises provided primarily focus on inducing and building awareness of these different discrete configurations, thick or thin. While thick to thin is a continuum, there is a clear audible and physical crossover point between the two qualities. Students should work to isolate the sensation, experience, and sound of both different modes. Ideally, we want to use the exercises as a landscape to allow us to observe these things. We want to explore the concept, isolate the sensation, really think about it, try to implement it with basic speech, gain greater control of it, try to apply it to much longer passages of speech or while you're just speaking throughout your day, and ultimately that allows you to normalize this through consistent application. Exploring, conquering, and cultivating the discrete break or glitch that separates the two different thick and thin states is very beneficial. It's one of the best ways to directly feel the very subtle muscle differences between these two states. Listen very carefully, have fun, and be very observant. Exercise 1, pitch slides for thinness. Now this is a wonderful exercise that takes advantage of your body's natural tendency to want to thin as you go up in pitch. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in a thick starting place, ah, and we're going to slide up in pitch, and let's first try and slide up in pitch while maintaining thickness. Ah, feels like an uncomfortable shouting. Now, let's try to slide up in pitch and thin. It should sound like this. Ah, ah, ah. If you think you have that, then try to slide down in pitch while maintaining it, like so. Ah, 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 ah. You hear that's not buzzing, right? It's not it's ha, ha, which is what we're looking for. Don't go up too high in pitch when you do this. Otherwise, you'll have a tendency to flip into falsetto, like this. Ah! We're not looking for that. We're looking to stay in our normal voice. Just find that thinner mode. Ah, ha, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you can start to talk with that. So let's try this. We're going to start thick, go up and find thinness, and then bring that thinness back down. Ah, ha, ha. Now the lower you go, the more compensation and thinness you have to add. Lower pitches want thicker vocal folds. Higher pitches want thinner vocal folds. Also, with this pitch slide exercise, some people actually find it easier to find thinness when you start in a fry. So you can go like ah, 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 as opposed to ah, which is what would be going to thick. Ah, ah, ah. So you can experiment with this one as well. Exercise 2, thick to thin pop test. Now, a pop test is sort of a community word that references when you go between different modes of your voice. So we've got falsetto and we've got our normal modal voice. And when we go between them, there's this awkward little gap, okay? A pop test is when you try to induce that awkward gap to show yourself what mode you're in. Now, there is a very subtle pop difference between the thick and thin mode. Take a listen. If I exaggerate it even more, this exercise is incredibly useful because if you can reliably get this pop to occur between thick and thin, you can focus really hard on what the different muscle sensations you're experiencing is, and then you can extract thinness more easily. This is also great if you're having trouble finding thinness with a high resonance. So for instance, if I start with high resonance, and then I hit it really thick, I can just pop test it. Heat from fire. So to accomplish this, it's sort of a few things. We can kind of induce it by letting a quick burst of hot air come into our sound. So if we're like, and then we try and go, that sometimes induces it. So, but it has to be like a kind of burst of air, not a, okay? So we want, and that should induce it. So have fun, explore this exercise diligently, and if you have any questions, post below. Exercise 3, pure mimicry. So you're going to listen to what I do and you're going to try and mimic it. Now there are more audio files for this on the document as well, so let's just do a few of them here. Ha, 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 part, ha, 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 ha. See how I'm coming onto the sound very delicately? I'm not going ha, ha. It's ha, ha, part, heat from fire, fire from heat. Let's try to mimic this. 3 short ones and they'll all be thick. Now let's try 3 short ones all thin. Ha, 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 ha. Ho, 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 ho. Ha, ha, part. Ho, 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 ha, ha, part. Mimicry is always a great approach because there's going to be some of you out there that can just mimic that right away. So for those of you who can do that, have fun. Exercise 4, physical compression of the head and the neck to induce thinness or thickness. If I extend my head forward and up without moving my shoulders, we will hear thinning. Isn't that cool? And the opposite works for thickening. We can bring our head down like this, so you can also do this in other ways by like tucking the neck down or pushing the head back or whatever. But essentially, when you compress the structure, you gain thickness. And when you expand the vocal folds or you stretch the vocal folds, you gain thinness. So that is why popping your head forward thins out your voice. The moment I learned the anatomy and physiology behind the thick and thin stuff, I immediately realized that we could just have students do that. So if you're having trouble getting your body to produce these sounds, try this approach and listen to what it sounds like, and then maybe that can give you a stepping stone to try and find it other ways as well. And of course, I don't want anybody out there like going throughout their day like sticking their neck out or whatever, you know, or that's not the goal of this. This is a fun exercise to show the intersection between the anatomical components that are going on and the actual sound components that are going on. Okay, so have fun with this. Exercise 5, onset and offset based approaches. Now, when you have thick vocal folds or you're in the thick mode, it's actually really difficult to gracefully start a sound without being super breathy. Now, when you're in the thin sound, you can start and end sounds way easier. So by training our onsets, the way that we start sound and the way that we let go of sound, we can actually get a lot of great thinness training out of that too. So for instance, we're looking for ha, ha. Notice I'm not breathy there, right? There's like no breathiness, there's no leakiness, there's no added air. It's just a thin tone that can swell in and out. Ha, 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 part. Notice the ending too. Ha, ha, ha. It's very graceful. If I'm thick, it will be more like ha. Now I'm being breathy to try and fake it, right? So, that is not what we're looking for. That is breathy thickness, and it pretends to be thinness. As opposed to which is what thick causes. The thicker the vocal folds, the greater the vocal fold mass, which means you require more energy or more sort of force to get them moving. And when they do get moving, they have more inertia, so they're even harder to stop moving as well. So play around with your onsets and offsets, listen to the audio file provided on the document, and if you have any questions, reach out. Exercise number 6, behavioral triggers. Well, it turns out there are a lot of day-to-day sounds that actually require or often use thinness. If we imitate the sound of a yawn or a sob, or when we talk really cute to a puppy dog or a kitten, or if we whimper, all of these things induce thinness. So for instance, try to mimic some of these.
Oh, that's very thin.
That is also with very dark and low resonance because we're yawning, which causes the larynx to drop. But that's a very simple approach. Another behavioral trigger is
like if I'm sobbing.
You hear that? Now that also drops the resonance a little bit as well, but it does induce thinness. I really like this one, like if you're like, aw, how cute, like, aw, that is a behavioral trigger that induces thinness. So if you imagine yourself talking to a cute baby or petting a cute kitten or something like that, that will typically induce thinness as well. You can also experiment with like whimpering, like, right? That induces thinness, part, but watch out because it also causes the resonance to drop. Another common behavioral trigger approach that people do is when they're really pleasantly surprised to see someone and they're like, oh, hey. These behavioral trigger approaches are likely going to be very useful for a lot of people out there, but I find that for untrained voices or for inexperienced voice alterationists, this is a little harder of an approach because you really have to commit to the character. So like if you're going to do the sobbing one, you really have to get in the headspace of sobbing. Or if you're going to yawn, you really have to get in the headspace of yawning. And experiment with those and see if you can leverage that into using it with your voice. Exercise number 7, semi-occluded vocal tract exercises to find thinness. If we block part of our vocal tract, it creates semi-occlusion, and that causes backed up air pressure to go back to the vocal folds. We can do this tons of different ways, like this, semi-occlusion, zzz, semi-occlusion, semi-occlusion. All of these create this sort of padding effect for the vocal folds because you have air pressure down here and then you have air pressure here that's backed up. It sort of sandwiches your vocal folds with air pressure, and it does a lot of really awesome therapeutic and beneficial things to help you find better onsets and find better thinness. Now, for voice feminization, we can take advantage of the sound the M sound, right? Now, this sound has the lips closed, so as a result, it creates fairly light semi-occlusion that causes back pressure to go to the vocal folds. Because of this, we can usually find thinness easier on an M. So let's try this. And whenever you think you have that thinness, try to gently open your lips. If you open them too quick, you'll destabilize the air pressure and your folds will probably go thick. So try this. Part, and try to use it. If you're doing this exercise and you're feeling very buzzy, like that's an indication that you're thick, okay? If you want even more occlusion, you can block one nostril and lightly block the other. And adjust the amount of occlusion you have, which is kind of fun. If you've ever noticed, the speech pathologists who teach this stuff are obsessed with the M's and the straws and everything. And the whole goal of that is they're trying to teach people how to find this thinner quality. They call it head voice. I'm calling it thinness. But they try to teach you how to find this thinner quality by way of semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. So have fun with these. You can do them with a straw. You can do them with a lip trill. You can also do it with an N or an NG. Exercise number 8. Voiceless thinness and thickness. So if you've watched my previous videos, you know that I'm a big fan of voiceless exercises that don't actually use pitch. Instead, what they do is they use this what we call a glottal fricative. Now, the quality of that sound can teach us so much. It can teach us what you're doing with resonance, it can teach us what you're doing with your vocal folds, and it can teach us what you're doing with your false folds. That's thick. I'll do it at different resonances as well. Now, you should also be aware that when you do this thick, you're also getting a lot of false fold engagement, which is something that we often have to train in voice feminization. So now I want you to try this. So you're going to make a thick air sound. Then you're going to try and make a thin one. You should feel the air flow through with much less turbulence when you're thin. Now, this is also training false fold constriction and retraction. So when you hear all that noise, it almost sounds like a frying skillet. You're hearing a lot of the false folds above the true vocal folds coming in. So we're actually training both of these things during this. To. You can also plug your ears, and if you hear the H sound, you're thick or you have a lot of false fold activation. And if you can't hear it while you blow out an H sound, you are using thinner sounds and no false fold engagement. This one is super important because if you're going to do the voiceless exercises that I have in my other videos, you need to make sure that you're doing it in a thinner, non-constricted quality. So for instance, if you're going, we don't want you going, because that's noisy, that's false fold, that's heavy. We want part. Here's the difference once again. Thick plus false folds. Thin without false folds. That one feels a lot more like you're just exhaling air. Continue to drive the airflow through, but try to reduce the density of that sound. Part. Okay, have fun with this one. Alright, so remember, these exercises are exploratory. The goal of them is not to get you to point A to point B, but to give you an environment to observe these behaviors of your body so that then you can start to reflect on what they are, how they work, so that then you can control them and use them in speech. Essentially what we're doing here is micro-stretching or micro-contracting our vocal folds. There are a few schools of thought about what this is and how this works, but I figure I'll save that for an anatomy overview video sometime. But essentially what you're doing is we're sort of stretching the folds and causing them to thin out, right? Thick, thin. okay? And there are a few different muscles that we use to change the tension distribution of the vocal folds: the vocalis muscle, the thyroid, the cricothyroid, and there might be some other things here as well that are sort of still in debate in the voice community about what it actually is. If you look at different voice models, everybody sort of includes this description of this process, but everybody has a different sort of understanding of what's going on with it. So by changing the vocal fold mass, we change something called spectral roll-off, which is this overall curve to our voice, okay? So this happens before resonance occurs. You can think about thickness and thinness and vocal fold mass as almost like a pre-filter filter. So you make sound, and then depending on the combinations of this thinness, thickness, airflow, closure, false fold stuff, you will produce a different source tone, and then you will feed that source tone into your resonance, okay? So we can think of this as a foundation. Now, something else that will be very useful for you all to know is that this is what people are usually talking about when they're talking about getting your vibration out of your chest and into your head. Many times people will call this chest voice and head voice. I really refuse to use those terms because they are so fuzzy and ambiguous. It's a nightmare because some people call head voice falsetto. Some people conflate head voice with thinness. And some people even use the word head resonance. This is not resonance. This is vocal fold mass, and it changes the spectral profile of your sound. Resonance is accomplished by changes of the vocal tract. I'm not sure why the speech language pathology community still chooses to teach trans women this concept as head voice and chest voice. We can describe it as thick and thin, which relates it back to the physiology much better, and it relates it back to the sound much better. Plus, when we think of it as thick and thin, then we understand that it is a glottal parameter. It's not some magical thing that you're moving your sound up. You can't move your sound up. It doesn't work that way. Sound is a point source wave. It just echoes out in the spherical pattern until it hits something which either dampens or reflects, okay? So you can't change the spatial position of sound in your body. You can change your vocal fold mass that creates less buzziness or sort of dense vibration down here, or you can change your vocal tract, which changes the resonant frequencies, which redistributes energy across your spectrum. So when you have a thinner sound, you have more spectral roll-off. It means that your voice is softer and less buzzy. There are less high harmonics in the voice. When you have a thick vocal fold sound, we would say you have a very flat spectral roll-off, which indicates that your really high harmonics are piercing through, which is what gives that buzzing quality that the male voice has, okay? Now, the muscles that we're controlling, they do help you change pitch, and they are actually active when we go to change pitches once we leave the thick zone of our voice. So this is somewhat related to pitch, but it's not really. We can go up in pitch without using the muscle that we're using for thinness, but we can also go up in pitch and use it. Now, if you look at this on a spectrogram, you'll see that when I go from thick to thin, there is often a sort of pitch up moment like that, okay? And this is because I'm performing that micro stretching and then compensating elsewhere with the vocal muscles in order to get the vocal folds back to their original pitch, but with less of the tissue activation. So shout out to my wonderful friend Nick at onlinevocalcoach.com. Shout outs to Rachel for first getting me interested in this phenomenon of what she calls trans feminine buzz. Special shout outs to Erica. Special shout outs to Wellington. Special shout outs to Kelly. Special shout outs to Savvy. Shout outs to literally everyone in the voice community who lets me springboard ideas off them and gain information from them and engage in this discourse that lets our community grow. So in conclusion, I hope you all now have an understanding of vocal fold mass, why it's important, how we can change it, and how it's going to help us. When we reduce the thickness of our vocal folds, it allows us to be much more agile with our voice, it allows us to reach higher pitches, and it allows us to sound much, much, much more feminine. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please just post those down below in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you enjoyed it or found it helpful. Please check out my Patreon if you would like to support the work that I'm doing here on this channel. And if you'd like to work with me in private lessons, please email transvoicelessons@gmail.com and you'll be added into my waiting list for lessons. And of course, don't forget to check out my music, both on Bandcamp and my other YouTube. So otherwise, thank you all so much for watching and have a great rest of your night. Bye!